Welcome back to Perkins Pipes. Got a classical warrior hat on. Got the centurion pipe that I made. Let's make sure we get to, oh, there we go in the light. We can really see the centurion's crest on that helmet there. Folks, we're going to talk about one of my favorite things in all of the world today. We're going to talk about the Latin language. As always, let's get this guy lit. Let's get to talking. It occurred to me a while back that I had, my tobacco started to fly away there in the breeze. Beautiful fall day here in Indiana. And it occurred to me that for all my talking about Latin on this channel, I've never really talked about why I enjoy it so much. And I got to say I do. And I also say I ought to. I better enjoy it because it's what I teach. It's what I've given my life to. And I got to be honest, folks, if you don't enjoy what you're teaching, probably shouldn't teach that thing. Shouldn't teach that subject. So, this isn't about why I teach. I've talked about it before. Not going to get into that story again. I want to talk about the Latin language itself. What is so wonderful about it? Well, golly, kids, there are so many things. And really just talking in no particular order here, this isn't a ranking of features about Latin that I like best to least or anything like that. Just things I like about the Latin language. And some of these things could certainly be said of other languages as well. Some of them may be unique to Latin. Some of them may be similar to English. Some of them may be very different from English. For one thing, I enjoy the sound. And there are really two different accepted sounds to Latin. Now, it should be obvious. We don't have any recordings, right, of Julius Caesar delivering a speech to the men on the field of battle, of Cicero declaiming in the Senate. We don't have that, obviously. What we have are clues. We know how languages develop. Obviously, Spanish and French and Italian and Portuguese. And others have derived from Latin, and so we know how sounds morph and change over time. And so we can kind of go back through that linguistic process to get an idea of how Latin may have been spoken. You get glimpses of things in the way people spell things in graffiti as opposed to the way they are spelled in formal literature. You get references, especially in poetry and in plays, the scripts of comedies and tragedies, in which the way a character says something is important to that play or that poem. For example, there's a classic example of a poem by the first century Roman poet Catullus, lived from 84 to 54 BC. In which he makes fun of a guy who is trying to sound cultured, and in doing so, he over-aspirates his words. In other words, he puts a little a little breath of air at the beginning of his vowels. It would be like if someone were learning English as a second language and had somehow come across the idea or been told or picked it up that a little huh in front of a sound made you sound educated. And so suddenly started, instead of saying apple, would talk about, oh, I think I'll have a apple. Well, the poem is making fun of this guy, but one of the things that does is it allows us to kind of figure backwards and realize, okay, then that isn't how you really said that word. So we have clues like that. Latin had some etymological roots from Greek, and so we know some features that way. So we have what we consider a reconstructed classical pronunciation. And this is what I teach. And in this pronunciation, words beginning with a V sound like a W. So that famous saying by Julius Caesar that goes V-E-N-I, V-I-D-I, V-I-C-I. We think that he might have actually pronounced that waney, weedy, weaky. The C sound is hard. So the great Roman orator, whose name is spelled capital C-I-C-E-R-O, we think that would be pronounced Cicero. Cicero. The AE sound, when taken together, those two vowels taken together, make an I sound. Now, over time, that pronunciation changed. And sometimes we talk about a medieval or an ecclesiastical pronunciation. And I've, for many years, had students who would come to me, they've learned some Latin, they get over to choir, they're singing something, and say, oh, Mr. Perkins, they're pronouncing it wrong. I say, no, they're not. And as for example, if you're singing the song whose title is A-V-E, and then the name capital M-A-R-I-A, it is properly pronounced Ave Maria, not Awe, because as you move into that ecclesiastical pronunciation, later pronunciation, the V sounds like a V. The G sound in classical Latin is hard. I already mentioned the AE sound as I, okay? And the C sound is hard, but that's not how you sing the song Queen of Heaven. R-E-G-I-N-A is Regina, not Regina. And C-A-E-L-I is not Kylie, but Caeli. Regina Caeli. So, first off, I like both pronunciations. I confess I do find the later pronunciation just more pleasing to my ear. Regina Caeli. It just flows. It has a more Italianate sort of feel to it. I kind of like it better than the classical, but I do enjoy both. So I like the sound. I like the fact that Latin is very compact. When you go to translate Latin, or any language, you cannot get a one-to-one correspondence. I think I may have talked about that on this channel before, which if you think about it is obvious. You can't, one word to one word. Okay, so same you say aqua means water. Okay, fine. There are a few things like that. But other things carry connotation, implication, allusion, reference, all built right into the word. For example, the English word G-I-R-L, girl, bears no linguistic connection whatsoever with B-O-Y, boy. Girl, boy. Totally different, right? Not so in the Latin. The Latin word puella, P-U-E-L-L-A, which is the word for girl, is a diminutive form of puer, P-U-E-R, which is the word for boy. By definition, in the language, you can see that the Romans saw a girl as a smaller boy. Okay? So you can kind of see where that's come from. It often takes us more words to say in English, for example, what would have been said in Latin. Latin doesn't contain the very important English words a and the. A and an being the indefinite articles, the being the definite article. And there's a big difference between saying a dog was on my deck and saying the dog was on my deck. Huge difference there, right? Latin actually lacks those words entirely. And so sometimes it's hard to tell, is a Latin author being more general or is a Latin author being more specific? And so then you have to put your own interpretation into the English. Which is why every act of translation is indeed an interpretation. That's why there's some, and again, I'm specifically speaking English translations here, folks, and the same principle would apply, translating from any language into any language. But if you just go online and look at how many English translations there are of the Bible, how many English translations there are of the Latin Aeneid, the great Roman epic poem, or the Greek epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's so many. Why is that? Well, because there's so many different ways to translate. So, for example, and I've written on this before and talked about this quite a bit. You take a simple Latin sentence like puella aquam portat. Literally, girl carries water. Okay? Now, how do you bring that over into English? Well, you could introduce the definite article, the girl carries water. You could put two definite articles in there. The girl carries the water. You could bring an indefinite article. A girl carries water. You could bring an indefinite article and a definite article. A girl carries the water. And what about the fact that English in the present tense also has simple, progressive, and emphatic forms, which Latin does not? Portat can mean carries, is carrying, or does carry. And there are subtle differences there. Now, you put that in the context of a piece of philosophy or a poem or a speech. Now you've got to take in context. You've got to think, what was this author trying to communicate in this particular way? Would it be more reasonable that this person was implying something a little bit more emphatic? The girl does carry the water. Is it saying something else, trying to indicate a general atmosphere? The girl is carrying the water, a setting of something. So all that figures into it. I like the fact that Latin, and again, this is very similar to other languages, and you certainly get this in Spanish and French and others, where the ends of the nouns change spelling depending on how they're functioning in the sentence. Okay? So, if I said, for example, I happen to, well, there we go. Here's my lighter, right? And I said, I bought a lighter. The lighter is in my hand. This is the lighter's lid. I put fluid in the lighter. Okay? All those different ways lighter is used, I really only spell it two ways. L-I-G-H-T-E-R. And the one time I change the spelling is when I say, this is the lighter's lid. I do change it a little bit with the apostrophe S in English. Well, Latin and Greek and some of the others would change the spelling every single time. Latin would say, look, when you say I bought a lighter, how that word lighter is functioning is very different from saying the lighter is in my hand. The word is functioning very, very differently. And since it's functioning differently, it should be spelled differently. You say, well, that sounds kind of confusing. It actually has quite a bit of clarity. Because of those specific endings, I know exactly who is doing what to whom and when and where. And because of that, I can put the words in any order I want. Let's go back to that simple sentence I had earlier. Puella aquam portat. Girl carries water. Maybe I don't want to focus on the girl. Maybe I want to focus on the water. And so I can say aquam puella portat. Now, it still means the girl carries water. But because I put aquam first in a sentence, I've given water a little bit more attention. So I'm really focusing. Think about a movie camera or a television camera. Right? What is the director focusing on? What does the director really want you to see? And you notice this in movies. Here comes the bad guy. And all you see are the bad guy's feet. All right? And the sound of the feet. You don't see the face yet, because that isn't what the director wants you to notice yet. The director wants you to focus on the feet. Or maybe here comes the person with the gun, right? And they're focusing right on the weapon. Maybe I say portat puella aqua. Maybe I put carries first. Because what I really want to focus on is the fact not that the girl is drinking the water or using the water to wash or to cook or to put out a fire, but carrying is the main idea. Now in English, I pretty much got to stay with girl carries water. In English, I pretty much got only one way to go. Subject, verb, object. And if I do change the order in English, if I say, the water the girl carries, immediately you, as an English speaker, you hear that very differently. You say, ooh, either that sounds like poetry, sounds old-fashioned, or sounds like Yoda, right? It's kind of Yoda speak. Water the Jedi carries, right? So I like the changing of the nouns there. I love the things that Latin does with participles, and Latin does so much with participles, really much more than English does. So I would say in English right now, I am smoking a pipe and recording a video. Latin would say, Steve smoking a pipe recorded the video. Latin likes to compress and subordinate ideas through the use of participles. Now, there are things that standard English is considered wrongity wrong. English teacher would mark them up all over the paper. For example, if I said, with the pipe having been smoked, I raked up the leaves in my yard. Your English teacher back in school would have gotten all over you for that. Call that a dangling participial phrase, with the pipe having been smoked. It doesn't connect to the rest of the sentence, and English considers that a bad thing. Latin does it all the time. It's a construction called the ablative absolute, and you cannot read a page of authentic Roman-authored Latin. I'm not talking about made-up textbook stuff. I'm talking about the real stuff. You can't read a page of Latin without coming across the ablative absolute. With the pipe having been smoked, Steve raked his yard. With the enemy having been defeated, Caesar marched into Rome. Stuff like this. I like that. I like the compactness of that. So I like the grammar. Gosh, got a little bite of tobacco in there. I like the grammar of it. I like the fact that focusing on the subtleties of one language make me far more attuned to the features of another. Now, it has long been said And it is true. People who study Latin very often have a greater command of English. And I've seen it. I've seen it in my students. I've seen it in myself. In how I write, in how I speak. I'm far more attuned. Oh, now it's just second nature. Because I'm thinking about the syntax and how things are constructed in English and how things are constructed in Latin. People often ask me, do you think in Latin? Not usually. Not usually. There have been a few times I have. I've thought in Latin because it was more precise, and thinking that way helped me shape a particular thought. I like Latin because of all the wonderful linguistic tricks that it has given us, especially from poetry and speech making. So many people are familiar with the famous line from President John F. Kennedy's inauguration speech when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And this is a classical thing. Greeks did this too, not just the Romans. But that's a figure called the chiasmus. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Country, you, country. A, B, B, A kind of arrangement. And it was the Greeks and the Romans who really were developing that and coming up with that as powerful, persuasive, artistic ways of saying things. Very often, when I'm reading something in translation or an article, I love to go look up the original, see what it says. Most of the times translations are pretty good. But every once in a while there's just something about the original that carries a little bit more. It just carries and you go, the English is fine, perfectly functional, serves you well. And especially, say, with Bible translations, and of course most of that's from the Greek and the Hebrew, but the point is still the same. You go back and you look at that original, and you get a little bit more nuance, you get a little bit more meaning, a little more depth to the understanding. So, that's what I like about Latin. Or at least some of the things I like about Latin. So, question for you. 2 questions, as a matter of fact. What do you particularly like about languages other than English? I'm not saying you got to be fluent in anything. Maybe you studied some Spanish back in the day. Maybe you studied a little German, French, Latin, whatever. What do you like about those languages? Please share that with us. Love to hear your thoughts. And in particular, I'd love to hear it if you have any experience with Latin. Please share that with us. You know I'd love to hear about that. As Malcolm Guite likes to say, I do these little things in order at last to do nothing. Or as I say in Latin, Parva ago ut tandem nihil agam. Have a wonderful day.